The large room was filled with young alien cadets from 12 different worlds. They sat in neat rows, their various forms creating a colorful display of the galaxy's diversity. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few glowed softly. In the dim light, all of them wore the same gray uniforms of the Galactic Defense Academy. At the front of the room, an old warrior made his way to the speaking platform. Kexar moved slowly, his forearms bearing deep scars from battles fought long ago. His insect-like body showed the wear of many wars. One of his compound eyes had been damaged, leaving a jagged line across the dark surface. The young cadets watched him with curious eyes, wondering what stories this veteran would share. Kexar reached the platform and turned to face his audience. His translator device hummed softly as it prepared to change his clicking speech into words the cadets could understand. The room fell silent, waiting for him to begin. "You think you know about war," Sexter said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "You have read the books, you have learned the rules that civilized species follow. When they fight, you believe war has honor and order." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Today I will tell you about the humans. After today, you will understand that everything you think you know about war is wrong." A young cadet with blue skin raised her hand. "Sir, humans are our allies now. Why should we fear them?" Sitar's damaged eye seemed to focus on her. "Fear them, child. You should respect them. The difference between fear and respect is understanding. Let me tell you about Kepler Station." Veteran moved closer to his audience, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. 20 years ago, the hegemony empire controlled half the galaxy. They had the largest fleet, the best weapons, and they thought they were unbeatable. Kepler Station was a small human mining outpost on the edge of their territory. It had 200 humans living and working there. Kexter activated a holographic display showing the space station. It looked peaceful, with solar panels and docking bays for cargo ships. The hegemony decided to take Kepler Station as a warning to Earth. They sent 10,000 soldiers, 50 warships, and enough firepower to destroy a small moon. It should have been easy. The cadets leaned forward, interested in the story. Most of them had never heard about this battle in their history classes. Commander Jake Morrison was in charge of the station. Kexar continued. He was a mining engineer, not a soldier. When the hegemony fleet arrived, they expected him to surrender immediately. Instead, Morrison sent a message that still gives me chills when I remember it. The old warrior paused, his translator clicking softly. Morrison said, "This is human territory. You are not welcome here. Leave now or we will make you leave." Hegemony Admiral laughed. "How could 200 miners fight 10,000 trained soldiers?" Kexar began pacing slowly across the platform. The siege began the next day. The hegemony expected it to last a few hours. It lasted 6 months. A cadet with tentacles for arms spoke up. "How is that possible, sir? The numbers don't make sense." "That's what we all thought," Kexar replied, "but humans don't think like other species." While we were setting up proper siege positions and following military protocol, the humans were doing something else entirely. The hologram changed to show the interior of the station. Morrison and his people turned their mining equipment into weapons. Plasma cutters became rifles, industrial Explosives became bombs, the artificial gravity system became a trap they used. Everything as a weapon. Sexter's voice grew quieter, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how they fought when our soldiers broke through the outer hall. They found humans waiting in the corridors. These humans had been exposed to vacuum for hours, their skin frozen and their lungs collapsed. By all rights they should have been dead. The cadets looked uncomfortable as K-Star continued. Instead they kept fighting. One human woman, a cook named Betty Walsh, had both legs crushed by debris. She crawled through the ventilation system for 3 days, setting traps and killing our soldiers with kitchen knives. The hologram showed the station's damage increasing over time. Sections were blown apart, walls collapsed in, atmosphere leaked into space. We cut off their power. They made their own. We poisoned their water supply. They recycled their own urine and sweat. We blocked their food shipments. They ate the dead. Several cadets made sounds of disgust. Kexar nodded grimly. Yes, it disturbed us too. In our cultures there are things we simply do not do. Even in war, humans have no such limits when they are protecting their home. Veteran stopped pacing and faced his audience directly. After 4 months we had lost 3,000 soldiers. The humans had lost half their people. Any other species would have surrendered. Instead, Morrison sent another message. He said, "We're just getting started." Kexter activated a new image showing the station's final battle. In the last month, only 50 humans were still alive. They were wounded, sick, and running out of ammunition. Commander Morrison had lost his left arm and was slowly dying from radiation poisoning. The hegemony admiral decided to end it with one final assault. The room was completely silent. Now, even the soft humming of the air recycling system seemed loud. 2,000 hegemony soldiers stormed the command center. Kexar said they found Morrison sitting in his chair, barely conscious. He looked up at our admiral and smiled. Then he pressed a button. The hologram showed a massive explosion. Morrison had turned the station's fusion reactor into a bomb. He killed himself, the remaining humans, and 1,500 of our soldiers in one moment. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from 3 star systems away. Kexar let the silence stretch for a long moment before continuing. The hegemony admiral survived, but he was never the same. He told me later that Morrison's smile haunted his dreams. A human male, dying and defeated, had smiled at him like he had won some great victory. A young cadet with green scales spoke up nervously, "But sir, they all died. How is that winning?" Sexter's compound eyes seemed to glitter in the light. Because word of Kepler Station spread throughout the galaxy. Every species learned what 200 humans could do when cornered. The hegemony empire began to fear attacking human colonies. Other species started asking humans for military advice. Balance of power in the galaxy began to shift. The old warrior moved back to the center of the platform. That is why you must understand humans. They do not fight to win battles, they fight to win wars. They do not count the cost to themselves, they only count the cost to their enemies. When a human decides to fight, they have already accepted death. That makes them the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Kexter looked around the room at the young faces staring back at him. "Tomorrow I will tell you about Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez." and her unit, you will learn how humans hunt in packs and why that terrifies every military commander who has faced them. The veteran turned off the holographic display. Class dismissed. Think about what you have learned today. Remember that these humans are now our allies. Be grateful for that fact. As the cadets filed out of the room, many of them were quiet and thoughtful. They had come expecting to learn about military history. Instead, they had learned about the nature of humanity itself. Some of them would never look at their human classmates the same way again. Kexar remained at the platform, watching the young beings leave. In a few years, many of them would serve alongside humans in the Galactic Defense Forces. He hoped his stories would help them understand their allies better. More importantly, he hoped they would never have to face humans as enemies. The old warrior gathered his materials and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring another story, another lesson about the species that had changed warfare forever. As he walked toward the door, Kexter reflected on the irony of his situation. Once he had been their enemy, now he was their teacher. The humans had taught him that even in war there was always room for redemption. The next day, Kexar returned to the lecture hall. The same young cadets sat in their seats, but something had changed. They were quieter now, more serious. Word of yesterday's story had spread through the academy. Some of the human cadets had been asked difficult questions by their alien classmates. Kexar noticed the difference immediately. Good, he thought. They were beginning to understand that war was not a game played by rules. Yesterday I told you about Commander Morrison and Kepler Station. The old warrior began. Today I will tell you about Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez and why humans are the most dangerous hunters in the galaxy. A cadet with purple fur raised her hand. Sir, humans evolved from prey animals, not predators. How can they be dangerous hunters? Kexar's translator clicked as he prepared his answer. That is exactly why they are so dangerous. Prey animals that survive become the smartest creatures on their world. They learn to think like their enemies. They learn to use every advantage, no matter how small. The veteran activated his holographic display. This time it showed a jungle planet with thick trees and heavy mist. This is Titan's Edge, a world on the border between human and hegemony space. The jungle covers most of the planet. Visibility is less than 50 meters in most places. The perfect place for an ambush. Kexar moved closer to his audience. I was there as an intelligence officer for the hegemony forces. We had landed 3,000 soldiers to secure the planet. The humans had only sent one small unit, 12 people led by Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez. The hologram zoomed in to show a small human woman with dark hair and calm eyes. She looked ordinary, unremarkable. Several cadets seemed puzzled by her appearance. Rodriguez was a reconnaissance specialist. Kexar explained her job was to gather information and avoid fighting, but humans rarely do what you expect them to do. The display changed to show the jungle from above. Red dots marked the positions of hegemony forces, while blue dots showed where the humans were supposed to be. For the first week, everything went according to plan. K-Star continued. Our forces secured the landing zones and began setting up bases. We detected the human unit moving through the jungle, staying away from Our patrols, our commanders were pleased. The humans seemed to be following proper procedure. The old warrior paused, his compound eyes reflecting the light from the display. Then our soldiers started disappearing. A young cadet with silver skin spoke up. Disappearing, sir, not killed. Kexar replied. Disappeared. Guards would be found unconscious at their posts. Patrol units would return with missing members who couldn't remember what happened to their missing comrades. Equipment would vanish from secured areas. It was like fighting ghosts. The hologram began showing incidents across the jungle. Soldiers found tied up in trees. Vehicles discovered with their engines removed. Communication equipment filled with mud and insects. At first we thought it was the jungle itself, Kexar said. Perhaps there were dangerous animals or natural hazards we hadn't discovered. But then the sound started. Several cadets leaned forward, interested despite their nervousness. Every night we would hear human children singing lullabies through our communication systems. The songs were sweet and innocent, but hearing them in a combat zone was terrifying. Our soldiers began having trouble sleeping. Some refused to go on patrol after dark. Kexar's voice grew quieter. Then we found the recordings hidden throughout our camps. Not just children singing, but families talking, people laughing. Everyday human conversation. Rodriguez and her team had somehow recorded thousands of hours of normal human life. The display showed small devices hidden in trees, under rocks, and inside equipment. These recordings played at random times, day and night. Our soldiers never knew when they might hear a human baby crying or a woman humming a song. It got inside their heads. A cadet with tentacles asked, "Why was that so effective, sir?" Because most species in the galaxy are social creatures. Kexar explained. We have families. We care for our young. We value life. Hearing those human voices reminded our soldiers that we were fighting people with families, not monsters. It made them hesitate. In combat, hesitation means death. The hologram changed to show a hegemony patrol moving through the jungle. The soldiers looked nervous, constantly checking their surroundings. But the psychological warfare was just the beginning. Kexar continued. Rodriguez's real talent was understanding how other species think. She studied our patrol patterns and learned our weaknesses. The display zoomed in on one of the missing soldiers. He was tied to a tree, unconscious but unharmed. My species, the Vithak, have excellent hearing but poor vision in low light. Rodriguez's team learned this quickly. They would approach our sentries during the day, when the light was bright, and use mirrors to reflect sunlight into our compound eyes. While we were blinded, they would inject us with human sleep medicine. Kexar pointed to another incident on the display. The Corvin species has a strong sense of smell, but becomes disoriented by certain chemical combinations. The humans mix their own sweat with jungle plants to create a scent that made Corin soldiers sick and confused. The old warrior began pacing across the platform. For each species in our force, Rodriguez found a different weakness. She turned our own biology against us. But that wasn't the worst part. The cadets waited in silence for him to continue. The worst part was how they used our captured soldiers. Kexar said. They didn't torture them or kill them. Instead, they treated their wounds, gave them food and water, and talked to them Like friends, the hologram showed human soldiers sitting around a small fire, with captured enemies sharing food and stories. Private Danny Cooper, one of Rodriguez's men, spoke 7 different alien languages. He would spend hours talking with prisoners about their homes, their families, their hopes for the future. By the time we rescued our people, many of them no longer wanted to fight. A cadet with blue scales looked confused. Sir, that sounds like kindness, not warfare. K-Star's damaged eyes seemed to focus on her. It was both. Rodriguez understood that the most effective weapon against any thinking being is doubt. She made our soldiers question why they were fighting. She made them see humans as people instead of enemies. The display changed to show the final confrontation. A large group of hegemony soldiers surrounded a small clearing where the 12 humans waited. After 6 weeks, our commanders had enough. They sent 500 soldiers to surround Rodriguez's team. There was no escape, no clever trick that could save 12 humans from 500 enemies. Kexar stopped pacing and faced his audience. Rodriguez knew she was trapped, so she did something that still gives me nightmares. The hologram showed the human lieutenant standing in the center of the clearing holding a small device. She activated a beacon that called every dangerous predator on the planet to her location. Kexter said. Then she and her team climbed into the trees and waited. The display showed massive creatures emerging from the jungle, things with claws and teeth and poisonous spines, all moving toward the clearing where the humans had been. Our soldiers found themselves surrounded by the planet's most dangerous wildlife. In the chaos that followed, Rodriguez and her team escaped, but not before she left us one final message. Sexter activated an audio recording. A woman's voice spoke calmly. In perfect hegemony standard, war is not about being the strongest or having the best weapons. War is about understanding your enemy better than they understand themselves. Humans have been prey for millions of years. We know how predators think because we had to learn or die. Now we are both prey and predator, and that makes us something new, something you have never faced before. The recording ended, leaving the lecture hall in complete silence. Rodriguez and her 12 soldiers held an entire planet against 3,000 enemies for 2 months. Kexar concluded, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through understanding the psychology of warfare better than anyone else in the galaxy. The old warrior looked around the room at the young faces staring back at him. This is why humans are dangerous allies and terrifying enemies. They don't just fight with weapons. They fight with knowledge, with psychology, with an understanding of what motivates every species they encounter. Sexter turned off the holographic display. Tomorrow I will tell you about Captain Lisa Hayes in the defense of New Detroit. You will learn why wounded humans become more dangerous, not less. As the cadets filed out of the room, many of them looked troubled. They had learned that warfare was not just about tactics and technology. It was about understanding the mind of your enemy and turning their own thoughts against them. Several human cadets remained behind, looking uncomfortable. One of them approached. Sitar. Sir, the young human said, do you really think we're that scary? Kextar studied the cadet with his compound eyes. The human looked so young, so innocent, just like Lieutenant Rodriguez had looked in her files. Scary, Kextar replied. No, young one, you are something much more dangerous than scary. You are unpredictable, and in war, unpredictability is the greatest weapon of all. The third day arrived with a heavy atmosphere in the lecture hall. Word of Kexar's stories had spread beyond the academy. Some alien cadets had contacted their families, asking questions about the human wars that their parents preferred not to discuss. The humans in the class seemed quieter, more thoughtful about their own nature. Sexeter entered the room and noticed the change immediately. Several seats were empty. Some cadets had requested transfers to other classes, claiming they could not serve alongside humans. After hearing these stories, the old warrior felt a familiar sadness. Fear often destroyed understanding before it could grow. Today I will tell you about Captain Lisa Hayes and the ground war on Arcturus Prime. Kexar began without introduction. This story is harder to tell than the others because I was not just watching this battle, I was part of it. The veteran activated his holographic display, showing a planet covered in gray cities and industrial complexes. Arcturus Prime was humanity's most important manufacturing world. Millions of humans live there, building ships and weapons for their growing fleet. The hegemony decided that destroying this world would human military production. Young cadet with golden scales raised her hand. Sir, if you were fighting against the humans, how did you survive? To tell us this story. Kexar's compound eyes focused on her. That is a very good question. The answer will become clear as I tell you what happened. The display zoomed in on a city called New Detroit. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky, connected by bridges and transport tubes. I was a battalion commander in the hegemony ground forces. We landed 50,000 soldiers to capture the industrial centers. The humans had only 10,000 defenders, mostly factory workers with basic military training. The hologram showed soldiers in heavy armor landing near the city. Captain Lisa Hayes commanded the human defense. She was a logistics officer, someone who normally organized supply shipments and equipment repairs, not a combat soldier. Kexar paused, his translator clicking softly. The first day of fighting went exactly as our generals expected. Our superior numbers and heavy weapons pushed the human defenders back. By evening we controlled half the city. Our casualties were light. Victory seemed certain. The display showed the progression of the battle, with red areas marking hegemony control spreading across the city map. That night Captain Hayes sent a message to all human defenders. Kexar continued. She said, this is our home. These are our families. They want to take everything we have built. We will not let them. Simple words, but they changed everything. The old warrior's voice grew quieter. The next morning we discovered what human determination really meant. The hologram changed to show the second day of battle. This time the red areas stopped expanding and began to shrink. Our first indication that something had changed came from Sergeant Major Torres, one of our field medics. Kexter said he reported treating human soldiers who should have been dead from their wounds, but who kept fighting anyway. A cadet with purple tentacles spoke up nervously. What do you mean, sir? I mean exactly that, Kexar replied. Human soldier named Pete Wilson had been shot through the chest with a plasma rifle. The wound should have killed him instantly. Instead, he used his own blood to mark enemy positions on the walls, then continued fighting for 6 more hours before medical help arrived. The display showed medical readings from the battle, heart rates, blood pressure, and pain levels that seemed impossible for any living creature to endure. Another human, Maria Santos, had both legs crushed when a building collapsed. Kexter continued. She dragged herself 3 blocks through the rubble using a broken piece of metal as a weapon to attack our soldiers from behind. When we found her, she was still conscious and still fighting. Several cadets looked uncomfortable. One with blue fur asked, "Sir, how is that possible? Pain is supposed to stop us from hurting ourselves further." Sexar nodded. "For most species, yes. Pain is a warning system that tells us to stop before we cause permanent damage, but humans seem to have the ability to ignore these warnings when something more important is at stake." The hologram showed Captain Hayes herself coordinating the defense from a damaged command post. Her left arm hung useless at her side, clearly broken. Captain Hayes was injured in the first hour of the second day, Kexar explained. A plasma blast severed the nerves in her arm and caused severe burns across her shoulder. Any other species would have been incapacitated by the pain. The display showed Hayes continuing to give orders, using her good arm to operate communication equipment while medics tried to treat her wounds. She refused medical evacuation, Kexar said. Instead, she had the medics inject her with stimulants that would be lethal to most alien species. These drugs allowed her to function despite injuries that should have left her unconscious. The old warrior began pacing across the platform, but Captain Hayes was not the most disturbing example of human endurance that day. Hologram focused on a young human soldier lying motionless in a pile of debris. Private Danny Cooper had been caught in an explosion that covered 60% of his body with third-degree burns. Our sensors showed no life signs. We classified him as dead and moved on. Kexar stopped pacing and faced his audience. 3 hours later, Private Cooper rose from that pile of rubble and destroyed our ammunition depot with a stolen grenade launcher. The cadet stared in shocked silence as the display showed the explosion that crippled the hegemony advance. Cooper was blind from his injuries, Kexar continued. His skin was charred black, his hair was gone, and parts of his uniform had melted into his flesh. He should have been dead. Instead, he had crawled half a mile through the city, following the sound of our vehicles to find our supply depot. Cadet with green scales raised her hand shakily. "Sir, what happened to him?" "After that, he died," Kexar said simply, "but not until after he had single-handedly delayed our advance by an entire day. The ammunition he destroyed was supposed to support our final assault. Without it, we had to wait for resupply." The hologram showed the battle continuing into the third day. By now, the human defensive positions looked like disaster zones, but they were still holding. By the third day, we had learned to fear wounded humans more than healthy ones. Sexter admitted a healthy human might hesitate, might look for alternatives to violence. A wounded human had already accepted death and fought with nothing left to lose. The display showed Captain Hayes on the third day. Her broken arm was now in a crude sling, and burn marks covered half her face, but her eyes were still alert, still determined. That was when I made the decision that saved my life, Sexar said. I walked into the human command post, under a flag of truce, and asked to speak. With Captain Hayes, the cadets leaned forward, surprised by this development. I told her that my soldiers were too afraid to continue fighting, Sexar explained. They had seen humans fight through injuries that would kill any other species. They believed humans were supernatural beings who could not be defeated. The hologram showed the two commanders meeting in the ruins of what had once been a city hall. Captain Hayes looked at me with those human eyes, and I saw something I had never seen before. Sexter continued, not hatred, not anger, but sadness. She was sad that we had forced her people to become something they didn't want to be. The old warrior's voice grew softer. She told me, we don't enjoy being monsters. We become monsters because sometimes that's the only way to protect what we love. If you stop trying to take our home, we can stop being monsters. The display showed hegemony forces withdrawing from the planet. I ordered my troops to retreat that day, Sitar said, not because we were militarily defeated, but because we finally understood what we were fighting. Humans don't just endure pain and injury, they transform suffering into strength, fear into fury, desperation into determination. Sexter turned off the holographic display and looked around the room. Many of my fellow officers called me a coward for retreating. They said I had been beaten by a smaller force. They were wrong. I had learned the difference between tactical withdrawal and strategic wisdom. A human cadet in the back row raised her hand. Sir, what happened to Captain Hayes? She survived, Kexar replied. She recovered from her injuries and continued to serve in the human military. Years later, when the war ended and humans became our allies, she was one of the officers who helped design our current joint training programs. The old warrior gathered his materials. Tomorrow I will tell you about Admiral Carl Tucker and the space battles around Jupiter. You will learn that humans are just as dangerous in the void of space as they are on solid ground. As the cadets filed out, Kexar noticed that several of them stayed to help their wounded classmates. A human cadet with a broken leg was being supported by two aliens who had been afraid of him just days before. Perhaps understanding could grow from fear after all. The old warrior smiled to himself. Captain Hayes had been right. Humans could stop being monsters when they didn't need to be, but the galaxy was safer knowing that they could become monsters again if necessary. On the fourth day, Kexar noticed that more cadets had returned to his class. Word had spread not just about the frightening stories, but about the deeper lessons they contained. Some students who had left were now back, sitting quietly and listening with new understanding. The old warrior also noticed something else. Human and alien cadets were sitting together now, talking quietly before class began. Yesterday's story about Captain Hayes had shown them that humans became monsters only when they needed to protect something precious. This seemed to make the aliens less afraid and the humans less ashamed. Today I will tell you about Admiral Carl Tucker and the battles in space around Jupiter. Kexar began. This story will teach you that humans are not bound by the same physical limitations as other species. The holographic display activated, showing the massive planet Jupiter with its swirling storms and many moons, dozens of space stations orbited the giant planet connected by streams of cargo ships and construction. Vessel Jupiter was humanity's most important military shipyard. Kexar explained half of their fleet was built in the orbital facilities around this planet. The hegemony knew that destroying these shipyards would human space power for decades. Cadet with silver skin raised his hand. Sir, space battles are fought with ships and weapons. How could individual humans make a difference? Sexter's damaged eye seemed to glitter. That is exactly what we thought. We were very wrong. The display showed a massive hegemony fleet approaching Jupiter. Hundreds of warships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready for battle. Admiral Tucker commanded the human defense fleet. Kexar continued. He had fewer ships than us, older weapons, and most of his crew were civilian workers from the shipyards. By every measure of military science, he should have lost quickly. The hologram zoomed in on the human flagship. It looked smaller and less impressive than the hegemony vessels surrounding it. The first day of battle went as expected. Kexter said, our superior numbers and firepower began pushing the human fleet back. Several of their ships were destroyed and many more were damaged. Admiral Tucker's forces retreated toward Jupiter's upper atmosphere. The display showed the tactical progression with human ships falling back while taking heavy damage. That night, our commanders celebrated. Kexar admitted, we believed the humans were trapped against their own planet. The next morning, we would finish them and claim the shipyards. The old warrior paused, his translator clicking softly. What we discovered the next morning changed everything we thought we knew about space warfare. The hologram shifted to show the dawn of the second day. Human ships were moving in patterns that seemed impossible. The humans had done something during the night that no other species had ever attempted. Kexar explained they had modified their own bodies for zero-gravity combat. Several cadets looked confused. A young alien with blue tentacles asked, what do you mean, sir? I mean they surgically altered themselves to fight better in space. Kexar replied, Admiral Tucker's Marines had magnetic implants installed in their bones. Their inner ears were modified to prevent disorientation in zero gravity. Some even had their lungs altered to hold more oxygen. The display showed human soldiers floating through space between ships, moving with impossible grace and precision. But the most shocking modification was discovered when we captured one of their engineers. Sexter continued, Megan Price had been working outside her ship when we attacked. She had been in hard vacuum for over 10 minutes when our rescue team found her. The hologram focused on a human woman floating unconscious in space, her skin blue from oxygen deprivation. By all medical knowledge, she should have been dead, Kexar said. Hard vacuum kills most species in less than 2 minutes, but when we brought her aboard our medical ship, she was still alive. A cadet with green scales spoke up nervously. How is that possible? Sir, human engineers had developed a technique they called vacuum walking. Kexar explained they would hyperventilate before exposure, flooding their blood with oxygen. Then they would exhale completely and allow their lungs to collapse safely. This gave them up to 15 minutes of survival time in space. The display showed technical diagrams of human modifications and survival techniques. Engineer Price had been using this technique to manually repair Damaged ships during combat, Kekstar continued while our engineers worked. Safely inside pressurized suits, human engineers worked directly in vacuum, moving faster and completing repairs. That should have been impossible. The old warrior began pacing across the platform, but individual modifications were not the most disturbing part of human space tactics. The hologram changed to show a massive battle scene, with hundreds of ships engaged in combat. The most terrifying moment came when Admiral Tucker decided to use his shipyard workers as soldiers, Keksar said. These were not trained Marines. They were welders, mechanics, and construction workers, but they knew the ships better than anyone. The display showed civilian spacecraft being converted into weapons platforms in real time. Human workers took apart their own construction equipment and turned it into weapons, Keksar explained. Welding torches became cutting beams. Construction robots became boarding drones. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. A cadet with purple fur looked amazed. They built weapons during the battle, not just weapons, Keksar replied. They built entirely new types of spacecraft that we had never seen before, ships designed specifically to fight in Jupiter's gravity well and magnetic field. The hologram showed strange human vessels that seemed to dance through space using Jupiter's own environment as a weapon. The turning point came when Engineer Price volunteered for what humans called a suicide mission. Keksar continued. Our flagship had heavy shields that our own weapons couldn't penetrate. Price decided to deliver a fusion bomb directly to our engine core. The display showed a small human figure in a basic space suit pushing a large device through the void between ships. She launched herself from a damaged human cruiser with nothing but a thruster pack and a personal shield. Keksar said our point defense system should have killed her instantly. Instead, she used pieces of destroyed ships as cover, bouncing from debris to debris. The hologram tracked Price's impossible journey through the battle zone, dodging weapons fire and using wreckage as stepping stones. When she reached our ship, she had been in vacuum for almost 10 minutes. Keksar continued. Her oxygen was gone, her skin was frozen, and she was barely conscious. Any other species would have been dead. The old warrior stopped pacing and faced his audience. Instead, she manually welded the fusion device to our engine housing and activated the timer. The display showed a massive explosion that tore through the heart of the Hegemony flagship. Our ship was crippled, our command structure destroyed, Keksar said, but that was not the end of Engineer Price's mission. Several cadets leaned forward, wondering how anyone could survive such an explosion. Price had calculated the blast pattern perfectly, Keksar explained. She positioned herself in a debris shadow that protected her from the worst of the explosion. When the blast wave hit, it launched her toward the nearest human ship like a projectile. The hologram showed Price's unconscious form spinning through space, carried by the explosion she had caused. Human rescue teams recovered her 40 minutes after she had first entered vacuum. Keksar said she had third-degree burns, severe decompression injuries, and permanent damage to her nervous system, but she was alive. A human cadet in the front row asked quietly, "What happened to her, sir?" "She spent 6 months in medical recovery," Keksar replied. "Then she returned to duty and helped design the human military's first dedicated Space Marine units, her techniques for vacuum survival became standard training. For all human space forces, the old warrior turned off the holographic display and looked around the room. The Battle of Jupiter taught us that humans do not simply adapt to harsh environments. Kexar said they remake themselves to master those environments. They turn the vacuum of space into an ally, gravity into a weapon, and their own bodies into tools of war. Kexar gathered his material slowly. Other species build ships to protect them from the dangers of space. Humans build ships to help them embrace those dangers. They do not fear the void, they make the void fear them. A cadet with golden scales raised her hand. Sir, are humans still modifying themselves for combat? The war ended before such modifications became widespread, Sexter replied, but the techniques still exist. Human space marines still train for vacuum operations. They still push the boundaries of what their bodies can endure. The old warrior moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow I will tell you the final story about General Patricia Wells in the last battle of the war. You will learn why the hegemony surrendered and why we now serve alongside humans instead of fighting against them. As the cadets filed out, many of them looked up at the ceiling as if seeing space for the first time. They had learned that the empty void between stars was not empty at all. It was full of humans who had learned to make it their home. Kexter remained behind, checking his notes for tomorrow's final lesson. The hardest story was yet to come, the one that still gave him nightmares, the story of what humans on the fifth and final day. The lecture hall was completely full. Word of Kexar's stories had spread throughout the entire academy. Cadets from other classes had come to hear the final tale. Even some instructors sat in the back rows, listening quietly to stories they had never heard before. Kexar entered the room and saw the crowd waiting for him. His old wounds ached more than usual today. Final story was always the hardest to tell because it revealed the true cost of human victory. It showed what humans were willing to sacrifice when everything they loved was threatened. Today I will tell you about General Patricia Wells in the last battle of the war. Kexter began, his voice quieter than usual. This story will show you why the hegemony surrendered and why we now fight alongside humans instead of against them. The holographic display activated, showing Earth's solar system. The blue planet hung peacefully in space, surrounded by its silver moon and the busy traffic of human civilization. By the final year of the war, the hegemony empire was desperate. Kexar explained, human tactics had spread throughout the galaxy. Other species were learning to fight like humans. Our military advantage was disappearing. The display zoomed out to show massive fleets gathering at the edge of the solar system. Thousands of hegemony ships surrounded Earth like a swarm of angry insects. The High Command decided to end the war with one decisive strike. Kexar continued. They gathered every remaining ship, every soldier, every weapon in the empire. The plan was simple: destroy Earth and break human morale forever. Cadet with blue scales raised her hand. Sir, how many ships did the hegemony have? 12,000 warships, Kexar replied. The largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. The humans had perhaps 3,000 ships to defend their home system. The hologram showed the tactical situation. Human forces were scattered throughout the solar system, vastly outnumbered by the approaching enemy fleet. General Patricia Wells commanded the human defense. Kexar said she was Earth's most experienced military leader, a woman who had fought in every major battle of the war, but even she knew that conventional tactics could not save Earth. The display focused on a middle-aged human woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She looked like someone who had seen too much war and carried too much responsibility. For 3 days the human fleet fought desperately to stop our advance. Sexter continued. They used every trick, every tactic they had learned during the war, but the numbers were too great. Slowly our forces pushed closer to Earth. The hologram showed the running battle with human ships falling back toward their home planet while taking heavy casualties. On the 4th day, General Wells made a decision that still haunts my dreams. Kextar said, his voice barely above a whisper. She decided to use Earth's moon as a weapon. Several cadets gasped. A young alien with tentacles asked, "Sir, what do you mean?" "I mean exactly that," Kexar replied. General Wells ordered the installation of massive fusion engines on the moon's surface. Her plan was to launch Earth's moon at our fleet like a giant projectile. The display showed the technical details of the plan, enormous engines being built on the lunar surface, calculations for trajectory and impact velocity. The moon had 50 million human colonists living on it. Kexar explained. Research stations, mining operations, entire cities built inside the craters and caves. It was humanity's first major colony beyond Earth. A human cadet in the front row looked horrified. "Sir, what happened to all those people?" Sexar's compound eyes reflected the light from the display. General Wells gave the evacuation order. Immediately, every available ship was sent to evacuate the lunar colonies, but there were only enough ships to save half the population. The hologram showed the frantic evacuation efforts. Thousands of ships moving back and forth between Earth and the moon, carrying as many people as possible. 25 million people could be saved. K-Star continued. 25 million would have to stay behind to operate the engines and guide the moon's trajectory. Without them, the weapon would miss our fleet and accomplish nothing. The old warrior began pacing slowly across the platform. "This is when I learned what human sacrifice truly meant." The display showed volunteers lining up at military recruitment centers on the moon, not just soldiers but civilians, families, children old enough to work the controls. Colonel Ryan Mitchell volunteered to lead the lunar garrison. Kexar said he was 45 years old, had 3 children, and a wife waiting for him on Earth. When asked why he volunteered, he said, "Someone has to stay. It might as well be me." The hologram focused on a human man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was hugging his family goodbye at a spaceport. 20,000 other humans made the same choice. Sexter continued. Teachers, engineers, doctors, farmers, people who could have escaped but chose to stay and die for their species. A cadet with purple fur asked shakily, "Sir, how could they make such a choice?" "Because they understood something that most species do not," Kexter replied. "Sometimes the only way to save what you love is to sacrifice everything you have." The display showed the final preparations, human families saying Goodbye knowing they would never see each other again. I was aboard the Hegemony flagship when our sensors detected what the humans were doing. Kexar said. Our admiral laughed. He said humans were so desperate they were willing to destroy their own moon. He thought it proved we had already won. The hologram showed the massive Hegemony fleet continuing its advance toward Earth, ignoring the activity on the moon. Then the engines fired, Kexar said. Simply, the display showed Earth's moon beginning to move slowly at first, then faster as the fusion engines reached full power. It took 6 hours for the moon to reach our fleet, K-Star continued. 6 hours during which 25 million humans worked together to guide their home toward our ships. They sent messages to Earth during those final hours. The old warrior stopped pacing and faced his audience. Colonel Mitchell's final transmission was broadcast to the entire human fleet. He said, "Tell our children that we were not afraid. Tell them we chose this freely. Tell them that love is stronger than death." Several cadets were crying now, both human and alien. The emotional weight of the story was overwhelming. The moon struck our fleet at 1/10th the speed of light. Kexter said the impact destroyed 8,000 ships. Instantly, the debris field eliminated another 3,000. In one moment, 11,000 years of Hegemony naval power was erased. The hologram showed the incredible destruction where once there had been the largest fleet in galactic history. Now there was only expanding debris and radiation. I survived because my ship was on the edge of the formation, Kexar explained. We were damaged but intact. As we watched the destruction, our admiral received a message from General Wells. The display showed the human general's face streaked with tears but determined. She said, "The moon you just saw die was home to 50 million of our people. 25 million of them chose to die rather than let you destroy Earth. This is what human love looks like. This is what human sacrifice means. Do you want to see what we will do next?" Kexar's voice broke slightly. As he continued, our admiral looked at the destruction around him and realized he was not fighting an enemy. He was fighting an idea, the idea that some things are worth any price, any sacrifice, any loss. The hologram showed Hegemony's ships powering down their weapons and transmitting surrender signals. The war ended that day, Kexar said, not because we could not continue fighting, but because we finally understood what we were fighting against. We were fighting a species that would sacrifice their own moon, their own people, their own history to protect what they loved. Old warrior turned off the display and looked around the room at the silent cadets. General Wells could have used Earth itself as a weapon, Kexter continued. She could have destroyed our entire fleet and every planet in the Hegemony Empire. Instead, she chose to sacrifice only what was necessary to end the war. She retired from military service immediately after the war. Kexter replied she spent the rest of her life working to help war refugees, both human and alien. She said she had seen enough death and wanted to spend her remaining years preserving life. Kexar gathered his material slowly. This is why humans are our allies now instead of our enemies. Not because we fear their weapons or their tactics, but because we understand their hearts. They fight not for conquest or glory, but for love. The old warrior moved toward the door, then paused. You are the future. Defenders of this galaxy, some of you. Will serve alongside humans, some of you. Will lead them, all of you must. Understand what you have learned here. He looked around the room one final time. Humans are not monsters, they are. Not supernatural beings, they are people. Who love so deeply that they will become. Anything, sacrifice anything, endure. Anything to protect what matters to them. K-Star walked toward the exit, his 4 legs carrying him slowly but steadily. The galaxy is safer because humans fight for it, but more importantly, the galaxy is better because humans love it. As the old warrior left the lecture hall, the cadets sat in complete silence. They had learned about tactics and weapons, about psychology and sacrifice, but most importantly, they had learned about the power of love too.